Hello and welcome. My name is Amira Hill Yancey, and I work as an educational consultant for the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, or PATN. As a part of my role at PATN, I am a contributing partner to the Multi Tiered System of Support, or MTSS initiative. The mission of the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. Our goal for each child is to ensure IEP teams begin with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. Pennsylvania's multi-tiered system of support is a standards-aligned, comprehensive school improvement framework for enhancing both academic and behavioral outcomes for all students. In Pennsylvania, response to intervention, or RTI, refers to the methodology that is used to determine how slow is slow and how low is low as an alternative to ability achievement discrepancy within the specific learning disability or SLD determination process. Pennsylvania's MTSS model represents an integrated system, meaning that cross-disciplinary teams use a problem-solving process to facilitate shared ownership for achieving academic and behavioral goals using a continuum of evidence-based practices and reliable and valid data sources. The academic side of MTSS, standards aligned, high quality core literacy, mathematics, and STEM instruction, is delivered within the context of culturally responsive practices, positive behavior supports, and family engagement. There are key components that form the foundation of Pennsylvania's MTSS framework. If a well articulated, well designed, tiered system is in place, schools are more likely to realize efficient, effective, and sustainable outcomes. Our learning intentions for today are to review reported challenges with MTSS implementation, explore considerations for administrators and practitioners, highlight the importance of collaborative problem solving within any change process, learn about effective professional learning communities and implementation recommendations, and finally, consider using high quality PLC resources to enhance outcomes. Now, let's turn to common challenges within MTSS implementation. Core MTSS teams often encounter roadblocks associated with these facets of implementation. Teams often report that large-scale buy-in is challenging and that MTSS implementation is difficult to maintain and sustain. Because the unit of change is the building and each building has its own unique personality, politics, and philosophies, it often takes a minimum of 3 to 5 years for a given school to work through the initial and full adoption stages of implementation. In general, the larger the magnitude of change required in a given school, the more difficult implementation is. Capacity building towards better system outcomes is a process, not an event. And in reality, there is no proverbial finish line. Now, let's review considerations for administrators. Fullen's quote, "The decisive element in successful implementation is a leadership culture rather than an individual leader," reminds us that long-lasting changes will require transformational leadership skills. When considering any innovation that will require transactional and transformational changes, it is important to assemble, and strategically so, key personnel as a part of your core MTSS team and then incrementally and gradually expand and rotate team members. You want your team members to possess the necessary skill sets associated with sound MTSS implementation: data analysis and instructional matching, sophisticated content expertise, knowledge of and experience with implementation of evidence-based practices, and relational influence, or what we call referent power. Your core MTSS team should also possess individual and collective skill and will. Remember that with any innovation or initiative that you want to be long-lasting, practitioners are the intervention when it comes to co-constructing school improvement processes and outcomes. Administrators should also understand some of the defining characteristics of adult learning and the role professional learning plays within a leadership culture. Teachers should have the opportunity to engage in peer coaching, team planning, and teaching, and collaborative research that enables them to construct new means for inquiring into their practice. Practitioners are constantly learning about evidence-based academic and behavioral practices. Most importantly, in order for one new evidence-based practice to become a permanent part of a practitioner's repertoire, they will likely need daily implementation practice, coaching, feedback, and reinforcement for their continued persistence toward fidelity of implementation. It's imperative that training and coaching co-occur in context to facilitate better implementation and meaningful changes for both practitioners and students. Peer and individualized coaching will be important resources for administrators to consider and mobilize if they think about how to best differentiate and meet adult learning needs. So, those were considerations for administrators, but what about for practitioners? In an MTSS framework, the majority of school improvement and other resources are allocated to Tier 1, the teacher, the classroom, core instruction. Therefore, the impact on learning, academic, behavioral, and social emotional needs to be significant and robust. At Tier 1, teachers are aiming for 80% or higher response rate, meaning that as a function of implementing everything you see here, the majority of students are responding adequately and do not need the provisions available through a Tier 2 and or Tier 3 support or services. Let's talk now about one of the cornerstones of MTSS implementation: collaborative problem solving. Because PLCs are often comprised of 6 to 8 practitioners who are steeped in refining the implementation of a given practice toward improved outcomes, they are one of the most powerful vehicles for facilitating collaborative problem solving, or more specifically, number one, transparency in practice; number two, supportive accountability for practice; and number three, ownership of individual and collective outcomes associated with practices. As a function of participation in structures that bring practitioners together toward a common goal, folks are reporting some pretty positive results given their time and efforts. These are just a few. In Pennsylvania's MTSS framework, professional learning and structures that support it, such as PLCs, serve as one of our 8 core components. Take a moment to look at the similarities between the roles and functions on a PLC versus the roles and functions of a core MTSS team. Hopefully, you see more similarities than differences, with one of the core differences being degree of focus. A PLC's job is to target a specific professional learning need related to specific and/or broader grade and building level goals and meet it. We can look at PLCs as branches or arms of a core MTSS or school improvement team. With PLC implementation, there are a few principles to keep in mind. In order for practitioners to move through the PLC implementation process systematically and effectively, it will be important to give practitioners choice, flexibility, and allow for small steps to be taken over time. This should occur within the context of supportive accountability. I want to stress that PLCs are likely to be most effective when team members have the freedom to pursue what matters most to them. We can offer support and guidance to what members choose to pursue through high quality resources. Additionally, administrators must ensure to the greatest extent possible that non-teaching responsibilities are lifted from teacher plates, allowing room for the commitment to the hard, ongoing work of a PLC. It may also be helpful for administrators to communicate from the onset that the impetus for establishing a PLC is not to quickly ratchet up test scores. So ultimately, and with respect to the issue of choice, the goal is to establish self-directed PLCs rather than principal-dependent PLCs. The second principle is flexibility. The adoption and implementation of evidence-based practices is certainly an expectation. However, many PLC's attempts will falter before they come to fruition. As many of you know, promising practices often are tucked away in the back of a real or mental filing cabinet and tagged as just won't work or that won't work here. It will also be necessary to keep teacher enthusiasm alive and cynicism at bay. One method for doing this is for the PLC facilitator to anchor the process as flexible, meaning that permission is given to relax and experiment with new teaching strategies and, moreover, to be unsuccessful. Being free to try something without worry that it will fail and reflect on the instructor allows professional growth. The parameters, though, are that educators choose strategies that have empirical backing and agree to keep working at them. Some PLC facilitators have made sure that during every PLC meeting, coaches and teachers do a problem together or watch a video of a lesson. Coaches and teachers are then prompted to analyze tasks or the instruction to uncover the underlying evidence-based strategies and skills that students will need to solve problems. The next principle is small steps. The research suggests that meaningful learning is a slow and uncertain process for adults, just as it is for students. Some teachers change more than others through participation in professional development, and some elements of teachers' knowledge and practice are more easily changed than others. Small steps towards this end will be rooted in the degree to which a community has been formed. That means there is ongoing development of a group identity. There are norms for interaction, such as having supportive yet challenging conversations about teaching. And then there is a sense of communal responsibility, particularly with respect to assuming responsibility for another colleague's growth and development. It will be rather difficult to expect teachers to create a community of learners among students if they don't have a parallel community to sustain their own growth. PLC facilitators will need to devote time and planning towards the establishment of trust and norms that support critical dialogue, as well as maintain a balance between respecting an individual community member while still being able to analyze issues within an individual's teaching. Okay, so we've covered the need for choice, flexibility, and small steps. The last principle is supportive accountability. Specifically, what can principals and/or other school leaders do in the way of supportive accountability? Number one, in terms of feedback, teams should keep logs and principals should read these logs and provide brief, productive responses on progress. Number two, principals can also help teams to become more visible by posting what they already are doing and studying in appropriate meetings through PTA updates and school newsletters. For example, a PLC team may be elected to share at every faculty meeting. Number three, teams also appreciate administrator interest. So, administrators are encouraged to facilitate and accept invitations to meet and discuss PLC work without micromanaging it. Number four, there will also be a need for administrators to spend time reviewing team processes and the research on effective PLCs. And number five, when school leaders sense that enthusiasm may be dwindling, there is going to be a need to show appreciation and remove any barriers to effective teaming. And finally, when students begin to benefit and learning increases, this should be recognized and publicized, since we know this is often the biggest motivator for teachers in our buildings. If you have not established a PLC but are interested or you would like to refine your efforts, it may be helpful to review some tips for initiating and sustaining PLCs. The first step is to assemble a voluntary team that is interested in designing a PLC initiative. It is preferable to go building wide rather than limit the initiative to a particular grade level. These are some questions that may be considered by individuals and then within groups of 6 to 8. Prior to implementation of a PLC, it may be helpful to reflect on your own professional learning experiences, what made them more or less meaningful, and to look at teacher needs across the system. It will be essential to familiarize yourself with the research on PLCs and communicate broadly why you would establish it in your building and how it might differ from other teams that currently exist. Upon establishment, one of the first priorities will be to decide upon group norms and identify a PLC goal. A structure for running PLCs will need to be adopted or developed as well. We want to highlight two of the tips for initiating, maintaining, and sustaining. First, let's look at teacher needs. We often hear concerns from teachers that professional development is too generic and doesn't correspond with their specific needs. PLCs provide an opportunity for differentiated professional development as well as ownership of their professional growth. Next, let's focus on establishing team norms. The tendency of leadership is often to rush in and begin PLCs. It is important to remember that establishing norms is a prerequisite for optimal teaming and communication over time. It may also be necessary to periodically revisit the agreed upon team expectations. In doing so, you are able to maintain and sustain effective and respectful dialogue, which is critical. Remember, the overarching goal of a PLC will be to revisit, reflect, and revise. In reference to the research on implementation guidelines, meeting every 2 weeks does not appear to be enough time to make substantive behavior changes, and if PLCs wait longer than 4 weeks, they appear to lose momentum. So, the recommendation is for PLCs to meet monthly. In addition, from the research, it also looks as if a 75-minute time frame is necessary to have critical dialogue, but really meeting longer than 2 hours doesn't provide any additional payoff or value. In terms of participants, fewer than 8 people put too much pressure on the group leader or facilitator, yet exceeding 12 people doesn't allow for sufficient time to hear from each member. It is also recommended that members represent mixed content areas, but that at least 2 members from the same content area are present. Teams should also think about incorporating educators from other disciplines like the related arts, school specialists, ESL teachers, school psychologists, special educators. Finally, and most importantly, each PLC meeting should flow similarly with the same sequence of activities and structure. From a practical perspective, we recognize that teams may not be able to find 75 minutes each month. However, these are the empirical guidelines. If you're wondering what a sample structure might look like, we have provided one for your review. You can see here that there is an introduction, starter activity, time for feedback, new learning, personal action planning, and a summary of learning that takes place at every PLC meeting using the sample structure that is borrowed from the work of Dylan Williams. These are websites that contain a continuum of free resources that pertain to PLC implementation, from articles on sustaining PLCs to sample meeting structures. Finally, these resources offer teams the opportunity to conduct a more thorough self-assessment that should inform next steps for refining their PLC efforts. Thank you for your time and interest today. We wish you continued success in moving forward with PLCs as an important component of MTSS implementation. Remember, practitioners are the intervention.